All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. We'll have some more people trickling in. So today's webinar here is going to be on common analytics pain points for publishers. So I'd like to introduce you to the topic and also walk you through some of the ways that you can actually solve some of these issues. Now, my name is Andy Gibson. I am the head of vertical for news and media over here at InfoTrust. We do digital analytics consulting and also product development work. We have around 4,500 sites that we analyze and support annually. We do a bunch of different digital analytics training programs. We are Google Marketing Platform certified, DoubleClick certified, and our kind of bread and butter is around Google Analytics 360, Google Tag Manager, and some of those products within that Google Marketing Platform. So let's go through some of the common analytics pain points for publishers we'll be talking about here today. The first is no data consistency across properties and brands. This is a big one that we see generally with all the publishers that we work with, or at least when we first start working with them. No ability to do enterprise level reporting across properties and brands. That's another big one. Analytics tools are expensive for high traffic organizations. So this is true for most of the tools. We'll actually talk about some ways to help consolidate those different types of hits and the way that they're being billed there. No insight into content's role in generating advertising revenue, another big piece, and the inability to deliver target audiences to advertisers. So the first section here we're going to talk about is no data consistency across properties and brands. A few things that we see, there's really not any type of consistency or standardization across the organization. This often causes mismatched and disparate data. We'll go through some examples here shortly, and I'll show you kind of what we're talking about here. But if you think about it, there are different properties, brands, and markets within publishers. And so if you're collecting different data points across all those different properties, brands, and markets, or similar data points but inconsistent values, things like formatting, spelling, even just the language of the values being collected, all that can cause issues with data consistency. This generally happens for a few reasons. So one is that each country, market, or brand actually operates independently from one another. So these actual markets, these countries, these brands aren't talking with each other about what data they're collecting, how they're collecting that data, and what they're using it for. Employee turnover has caused implementations to change over time. This is another big one. So we often see that when we first start working with an organization, and generally this is one of the reasons they bring us in, is that the people that they were working with initially to set up the tracking and the architecture, they've been gone from the organization for a year or for 2 years or something like that. And now no one really owns that implementation within the organization. In those cases, that causes an issue because whoever set it up initially had a rhyme and reason for doing things. Most likely they didn't pass on any of that information and that documentation around the implementation, the architecture, why things are being tracked like that. And so there's no real roadmap for how to improve those. Also using different analytics platforms altogether. And this is a really big one. A lot of publishers use Adobe or Google Analytics 360 or a combination of Adobe and Google Analytics 360. There's also Chartbeat out there and some other analytics tools. So Parsley is another one. So there's a lot of issues where, one brand will say, hey, we have 150 million uniques last month. What do you guys have? And another brand might say, we have 50 million uniques. Where did you get that number from? And they're saying, well, we're looking at it in Parsley, whereas someone else is getting the number from Adobe or someone is getting the number from Google Analytics. And so while the concept of unique users and users is the same across those tools, there are slight variations to how those tools are measuring that and what process is being used to actually collect those users. And so there is going to be some differences in between those numbers. And so using different platforms, of course, is going to cause some issues with different numbers and just the confusion around that. That's generally one thing we see when companies are using multiple analytics platforms. So let's review a couple examples of inconsistent data capture here. So let's take an example. Say this is publisher A, and this is our facepalm here. This person has a US property for mypcreviews.com, and they're using Google Analytics. Same thing with the UK version, they're using Google Analytics as well, mypcreviews.co.uk. So in this case, they're actually using custom dimensions to collect some custom data points that they use for analysis, reporting, stuff like that. So in this case, they're using, the US team is using author, content category, subcategory, ID, type, tags, etc. And the UK team is using some similar things, but some also different things. So in this case, US is using author. The UK doesn't have a concept of author that's being collected. So there is no way to compare the top authors from the US versus the UK, just not possible right now. Content category, they have the very similar custom dimensions here. They're in the same slot number, they have the same name, but they're actually categorizing content differently. So the US is using a high level category of PC and then a subcategory of laptops, whereas the UK team, for the very similar piece of content, they're actually using reviews as the category, and then the subcategory is kind of what that review is related to, so PC. So you can see here if the US says our top content category is PC, and the UK says our top content category is reviews, there's a mismatch there between the data. It doesn't make sense the way they're comparing those. It's not apples to apples. Now also, the US team might be collecting a content ID. The UK team might be collecting an article ID. So I'm not sure if those are the same things, but you can also see for the same article, it looks like the US team is collecting a 4-digit number, whereas the UK team is collecting a 5-digit number. So this causes also some confusion with, are we looking at the same thing? Where's this content ID or this article ID coming from? And is there a way to match these up? Now also the content type, you can see here on the left side, the US is actually setting it to review, whereas the UK is setting it to article. So if you remember, the UK was setting their content category to review, and now the actual US team is setting content type to review. So there's a mismatch also here with data. They're collecting the same concept, content type, but they have different values and they're not categorizing that content the exact same. So again, this is going to cause issues if the US team and the UK team are trying to compare their top pieces of content. UK might lump all of their pieces of content into an article type, whereas the US team is actually breaking it out. The content type is article specific, but it's also broken down into review or buyer's guide or something like that. And then we also article has video. Both are collecting it in this case. One is actually collecting no, the other is collecting false as a value. Again, this is not ideal. You're causing some confusion between the teams, and it's only going to cause you issues if you're doing comparisons and reporting and stuff like that. And then in this case, we're looking at date published. There's different formats. Both are collecting date published and date updated. They're actually collecting them in different slot numbers. So US team has CD8 and CD9 configured. The UK team has CD9 and CD10. Ideally, we would see that they're both in that same slot number, 8 and 9. And also they're sending in different formats. So on the left-hand side, they're sending in year, month, day format. On the right-hand side, they're actually sending in a timestamp. So again, comparing this is going to be confusing. You're going to have to format one of these into the other to be able to compare and contrast. So not ideal. And again, another piece is they're collecting if it's premium content or not. Separate values meaning the same thing, so no versus false, and they're also in different slot numbers as well. So looking at this, it's not ideal if the organization at the top level, a CEO says, hey, I want to see the top performing content across the US and UK teams. Let's pull out all that information and put that into a dashboard. There's a lot of mixing and matching that's going to have to happen, and the values aren't going to make a whole lot of sense. There's going to be different concepts for the actual values that are shown here, which is not ideal. So ideally what we want is something that looks like this. We have all of the same custom dimensions collected here in the same slot numbers, and then ideally those values are going to be the same or very similar. So in the case where maybe the UK team has a CMS that is adding an extra digit or something, that's fine. We still know that we can look at the first 4 digits and they match or something like that. But this is what we ideally want to get publishers to. We're collecting all the same types of data points in the same position, so we can connect both of these options to a data studio report or a Tableau report or something like that and say, okay, for both of these properties, pull out the top author and just pull that by custom dimension value 1. So in this case, you can see here it shows Andy Gibson and also shows Jack Ryan. So this is ideal. This is not ideal. This is not what we're looking for. This is hopefully what we're looking for. So really the solution here, and we just talked about that, is that standardized global architecture. So being able to have an outline of everything that needs to be collected, but it's standardized and it's global looking. So, you know, you have the same concepts of data capture from the US team, the UK team, the Germany team, and so on. And so we have this outline to say, okay, every single region or every single brand or whoever, these are the data points you need to collect, and these are the positions and the spots and stuff that need to be that they need to be put into. So if we're doing something like a roll-up property, we can pull that at the highest level, at the enterprise level, and say, okay, across all of our different brands or across all of our different countries, show us the top author. All we have to do is say, look at custom dimension 1 and pull the values for that. Much easier than having to write in, you know, really complicated formulas looking for, in this region it has to be custom dimension 1, in this region it has to be custom dimension 5, over here it has to be custom dimension 9, combine all of these into the same spot. It's just way too confusing. What we're really looking for is this standardized global architecture to make our lives easier. In this, you can also see on the right-hand side, if we're looking at just that US UK example, we're also saying what CMS field mappings these different variables map to. So in the case of each of these regions or each of these countries, they both have their own content management system. And so in that content management system, the author is going to come from a field named in the CMS as author with a capital A. In the UK, it's a lowercase a. For primary category, or for content category, I should say, the US, it's called primary category, all capitalized. In the UK, it's everything lowercase, and then there's actually an underscore in it as well. So this really helps everyone get on the same page of like, okay, where are we pulling this data from, and where is that data currently? And so ideally, you're pulling these, mapping these to your actual dimensions over here on the left-hand side. Now, the second piece of this is the lack of ability to do enterprise level reporting across brands and properties. And so I made a quick reference to that about roll-up properties. But in this case, without the ability to do this enterprise level reporting, you are going to really miss out on a lot of these opportunities to answer these questions. So some of the questions I would ask, do you currently have a dashboard that shows you the top performing properties, markets, platforms, and or brands across your organization? Are you able to see content performance broken down by common dimensions like content category, type, author, tags, or keywords across those properties, brands, platforms, etc.? If you don't, what you need to do is work with your team or your analytics consultancy to actually put together a global architecture with these roll-up properties. Now, if you're using Google Analytics 360, Google Analytics 360 actually has a tagless roll-up property option where it doesn't require any retagging on your sites. As long as all the properties are within the same GA count, you can actually create a roll-up property that will pull in all of those properties data and split it out so you can see property A versus property B versus property C. So this gives you a consistent global architecture. We just talked about that, but across all these data points, so markets, platforms, brands, and really the benefit here, especially with GA360, is these roll-up properties specifically, Google's going to handle that actual heavy lifting. There's no code updates required. You don't have to export any of that data. No duplication work is needed in another tool. It's very quick and easy to get set up, and you have this enterprise level reporting to be able to pull this information. You can also connect these roll-up properties to additional tools like a Tableau, Data Studio, Domo, your internal database, wherever you need to send that data and do some reporting on it, or some visualizations, you can do that. It's very easy. For our publishers, we have a lot that are using roll-up properties, and we connect those to either Tableau or Data Studio for some really cool visualizations, but it also allows them to see at a high level how are all of our properties performing. And then if you need to, you can dive into specific properties and look at the top stories and stuff like that. Now, this would be an example dashboard through Google Data Studio for one of the publishers that we work with. On the left-hand side, and this is a roll-up property that's attached here. On the left-hand side, you can see the audience overview information, so total number of sessions, users, page views, etc. On the middle top, we have top channels and device usage. So this is just giving us a high-level overview. And then we have the top pages there, so we can see the top pages across all of the rolled-up properties. So in this case, this is all of their US properties. So they can come in here and look at, for the month of, or for last month, what were our top performing stories that were actually seen. In this case, we're looking at the same roll-up property, but this is article specific. So we can see broken down by top articles and then also top authors. So this is across the organization for those US properties. We can pull this and say, okay, Andy Gibson is the top author with 185,000 page views. Here's how the page views are trending over time. And we also have some filters set up on the right-hand side if you want to look for specific authors, specific pages, or specific types of content or content classifications. The next section here to talk about is just the sheer fact that a lot of analytics tools are expensive for high traffic organizations. So a lot of the organizations that are using an analytics tool, a paid analytics tool, like an e-commerce company, like a CPG company, they're not really getting millions and millions of visitors each day. Publishers are. Publishers are getting a ton of traffic every single day. Also, a lot of publishers have live streaming. So they might have a ton of videos on the site that are live streamed. They might have just a live stream portal where visitors can go. All of that causes the data collection to just be astronomical. So there are a few things that we can actually do, but really the pricing model is the same for most of those analytics tools. There's no way around that. They're based on the actual number of total hits. So the hits are going to be something like the page views or the events or the transactions that are being sent. Every single time you send a piece of information to your analytics tool, that's a hit. And every single one of those pieces of information costs you money. So, and again, we talked about this, e-commerce and retailers and brands, they don't really generate the sheer amount of traffic that publishing companies do. So these are the reasons why the actual analytics tools are much more expensive for publishers. So let's take an example here. Let's take TBS, Turner Broadcasting Systems. If you look at CNN, they're estimated, just the US site for CNN, at around 854 million monthly page views, just for CNN, just for the United States. If you look at Bleacher Report, across all of the countries, they're estimated around 1 billion or so monthly page views. Now, Bleacher Report's owned by TBS, CNN plus Bleacher Report, that's almost 2 billion hits just in those two properties. And again, CNN, that's only US, not any of the other countries. So for them, TBS owns a number of other properties. They're looking at probably 5 billion, 10 billion, something like that. These are very high priced tiers within any analytics tool. Another reason for why publishers' analytics tools cost so much is because you're not only tracking page views and screen views. So you have a ton of traffic coming to the site. Of course, people are looking at stories and articles. That's not the only thing that you're tracking. So a lot of these publishers have, like I mentioned, live stream videos or just embedded videos that you can actually play. And so they obviously want to understand the engagement with those videos. Now, in this case, that could be something like the number of plays, pauses, the percentage watched for each video, or for live stream, just the live stream time that's watched. So maybe like every minute, there's another hit sent to your analytics tool to say, okay, yes, they're on this, they've watched this video for another minute. Same thing with article engagement. So instead of just understanding, okay, we've had 5 million people visit this page today, do you also want to understand if people are sharing it socially, if people are following external links within that article somewhere else, or if people are actually reading the article? Are they scrolling down and actually looking at the article, or are they landing on that article and leaving right away? All these are types of engagements that publishers track and what to track, but all of these, again, are sending hits. So if you think about something like the number of video plays on a website, that's going to be a large number if you're ESPN or if you're CNN.com or something like that. So this is definitely going to get costly. Now, what we hear a lot of the times are, let's track everything for now. We'll figure out what data we actually need at a later point. No, let's not do it this way. This is not a great way to do things. One is, especially for publishers, this will be extremely expensive. Most of the time, you'll be allotted ahead of time. You guys have up to 2 billion hits a month. Anything over that, you're going to get charged an overage. Now, if your development team implements some new homepage video or something like that and wants to track that, they add tracking to that without talking to you. You as the business buyer, they might go through that 2 billion very quickly, and now you're going to show up next month with a $1,500 overage fee or $5,000 overage fee or whatever it is. Let's not do this. This is not a great way to do things. We don't ever recommend just tracking everything and figuring out after the fact. You really need to work with your different teams to understand the data points that are needed and then track those specifically. So the first solution here is to create a measurement plan and tracking plan. So really your organization, and this is for not just publishers, but this is for really any type of organization doing digital analytics, your organization needs to first identify what is important to measure on your platforms. Now, this typically will tie back into your business objectives and your KPIs. You need to obviously be able to track those KPIs. So how would we go about tracking those, and what do we need to track? Those pieces all are part of that measurement plan. And really the measurement plan is just a document that translates those business objectives into metrics, dimensions, and engagement that you need to actually track across your platforms. So this is your priority one. Now, that there are additional types of engagement that are good to have. So you want to be able to track them, but they're not tied directly to your business objectives. So in this case, this would be something like scroll depth tracking on article pages, wanting to understand how far down a page people are actually reading. Most likely that's not a business objective of yours. Make sure that people are reading specific articles, but it can be looked at as a way to optimize engagement. Engagement might lead to more ad revenue, which ad revenue might be tied to your business objectives. So these are more like supporting types of tracking, but they are still important to track, so we don't want to lose sight of those either. So your measurement plan is for your business objectives, but there's also additional things that need to be tracked that don't necessarily tie directly to your business objectives, but they are good to know and good to have. So a tracking plan then actually translates the measurement plan, those priority one items tied to the business objectives, with the additional engagement that you want to do, that you want to track, the priority two stuff, into tracking specifications that can be added to your sites and apps to ensure everything you need is being tracked. So this is something that you would actually give to your development team and say, okay, here's everything that needs to be tracked. Get to work. Go track everything for us. Let us know when it's set up and we can test and make sure everything's working properly. You're going to need the IT and dev team to do that for you generally. It's going to be a lot of kind of development intensive stuff, but they're the ones that control the code on your site or your apps. They're the ones that need to add that tracking. I actually did a previous webinar on web and app measurement, so I actually explained both the measurement plan and tracking plan in there. There's a link in this document that we'll be sending out, this slide, so you can actually click on that link and view that previous webinar if you want to. So the first solution is that measurement plan and tracking plan. The second solution is just tracking more efficiently, so being more cognizant of that hit limit and tracking things with a purpose. In this case, there are a lot of times when people set up tracking and don't really think through how to do it efficiently. So for instance, we have customers and we have clients that set up things like video tracking. And so they might track any type of interaction with one of those embedded videos on their site. So for instance, they might have play tracking, pause tracking, and then quartiles watched to signify people, how far in that video people are actually watching. So you have 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%. If we're tracking all of these and we send each one to our tool of choice, like Google Analytics 360, that's 6 total hits. We're tracking the play, the pause, and then each quartile watched if they watch to the very end. That's not very efficient, right? Our solution would be to put together an efficient model. We're actually reducing the amount of hits that are being sent. So in this case, we might still track the same exact things, play, pause, and quartiles watched, but we're only sending the last quartile that was seen. So in this case, we're not sending 25%, 50%, and 75%. We're only sending 100% because this person hit 100%. They watched the entire video. Why do you need to know that they hit 25, 50, and 75? Those are understood, right? If you hit 100, you obviously hit 25, 50, and 75. So in this case, we've actually reduced our total hits by 50%. We have half. We have 3 total hits versus 6. Think about this on a sheer scale level, 500 million visitors per month with all these different video plays. That's a ton of savings there. Now, the next example is very similar. So scroll tracking. I see this a lot. A lot of online articles will tell you how to do scroll tracking and how to set it up. But what they don't do is kind of like our solution to actually limit the amount of hits being sent. So in this case, you have, we're tracking the actual page view. So that's 1 hit. And then we're sending an event to Google Analytics for each quartile that's been scrolled. So this is going to tell us, whether or not someone is reading, ideally, one of our articles. So if someone scrolls all the way to the bottom of the page, we send a page view, of course, but then we send each quartile as an event, 25, 50, 75, 100%. In this case, again, very similar to the video, we only want to track how far down someone has made it. We don't need to track every single quartile because the previous quartiles are understood. Make it to 100, understood that you went through 25, 50, and 75% here. So in this case, tracking the same thing, but we're only sending that last quartile scroll. So about 60% reduction in hits here. So in looking at this is really important to work with your analytics consultant around laying out ways to efficiently track your site. You don't want to be surprised when you purchase a brand new tool. It's a couple $100,000 a year tool, and then you start getting billed thousands of dollars on top of that monthly because you are trying to track everything and you don't have a efficient tracking plan set up. That's not good. You don't want to go back to your team and say, hey, sorry about this. I know you cut us a check for $300,000, but we need an extra $10,000 to cover the overages for the last 2 months. That's not something you want to go do. So be very cognizant about those billable hits and about the way that these analytics tools actually do bill you, because you want to make sure that what you have budgeted for in terms of cost is where you're going to end up. You don't want to blow through those budgets because you just didn't work with your development team or your analytics consultant to figure out the most efficient way to track things. The next section here is the lack of insight into content's role in generating advertising revenue. So one question I like to ask publishers is, can you actually calculate the value of each individual piece of content on your website? Generally, the answers you get are looks of kind of bemusement, and then they say no. Also, what about the value for the different types of content on your site? So articles versus slideshows versus video, again, kind of a look of no, flabbergasted, nope. We see that many publishers only actually see their advertising revenue in the aggregate. They have no way of breaking down the specific content that is actually driving the most revenue. Another example is author. Obviously, that's a big piece. People go to read specific authors on sites. Do you know what your top authors are in terms of generating advertising revenue? If you don't, how can you figure that out, and what are you going to do with that information? Maybe we have author 1 that is just killing it. They're generating a ton of advertising revenue for us. We probably want him to write or her to write much more often than author 2, who is really not generating any advertising revenue at all. The solution in this case, if you are using Google Analytics 360, is to connect your ad serving platform with your analytics tool. So one of the benefits of Google Analytics 360 is actual integrations with other kind of premium Google products like Google Ad Manager, which is the previously named DoubleClick for Publishers, or DFP. So in this case, what you can actually do is send data from Ad Manager about the actual ads people are seeing into Google Analytics to do reporting off of that. So in this case, you can actually see this is a Google Analytics report, but it's actually pulling in DFP metrics to tell you in the aggregate. In this case, this is just an overview report. what your publisher impressions are, so how many ad impressions have you had, the actual coverage, your ad coverage, monetized page views, the number of clicks on those ads, click-through rate, revenue, and so on. This will give you a great high-level idea of, okay, how much are we actually generating on the site? And now you can actually layer on top of that and get a little bit more granular and base it off of things like page URL. So now you can actually tie it to a specific page and say, okay, how much revenue is this specific page generating for us? In this case, you can see the first page is the home page, just that /, and that's generating almost $71,000 in this time frame. And so this is a great way to compare the different pages on your site, your different articles, stuff like that, and figure out, which are the most revenue generating ones, and how can we get more people to see these because they are generating the most revenue for us. Now, if you do have that global architecture that we talked about, collecting things like display type, author, content category, tags, any of these things, you can also break out these DFP reports by those. And so in this case, we're collecting display type as a content group. And so you can actually see we're looking at article versus just the homepage versus slideshows versus specific category index pages, search results, the author index, a list of authors, etc. We can actually compare these across each other and now look at what's generating the most. So in this case, for this publisher, as probably makes the most sense, their articles are actually generating the majority, 86, almost 87% of their publisher revenue versus all of these other different types of display types. So very high level, we can see what types of content are producing the most. If we're collecting things like author, we can also get a better idea. In this case, we're looking at another content group for content type. So this is like the actual different types of content, different pieces of content on the site. So we have things like how-to, just a news article, a feature article. These are generally longer than your kind of like how-to or news, reviews, opinion, tips, etc. And now we can actually compare these against each other as well. So as long as we're collecting all of these data points within Google Analytics or within your analytics tool, you're able to then layer on these DFP, these Google Ad Manager metrics to compare and contrast. The last piece here is the inability to deliver targeted audiences to advertisers, and this is a really big one. So we talked about the integration with GA360 and Google Ad Manager, formerly DFP. The integration we talked about was actually pulling data from DFP, from Ad Manager, and putting it into Google Analytics reports. Now, there's a second feature of the integration, which is actually sending information from Google Analytics over to Google Ad Manager for targeting purposes. So what you can actually do is actually build audiences within Google Analytics based off of your Google Analytics data. So in this case, we're creating a, we're creating an audience for days since last session is less than or equal to 7. So someone that's been on the site in the last 7 days. In this case, if we want to target these people directly, we create this audience, we can share it with our connected Google Ad Manager account, and then send this audience over to Ad Manager to actually target towards. So this is a very simple version of that. But if you think about another more kind of advanced version, we might have people that we consider highly engaged people. So people that have had 10 or more sessions across the site, and also have viewed a specific type of content. So in this case, this is like our highly engaged users that look at reviews. So in this case, if we want to further layer on this, we could look at reviews by specific like product types. So laptops versus hard drives versus monitors, stuff like that. And if we have someone like a monitor advertiser that's wanting to target people that look like they are kind of in that buying process around monitors, we can send that audience based off of their engagement with our site. We can create that audience in GA and then send that over to Google Ad Manager to target off of. So we can kind of layer in the user data that we know that's in GA along with the actual engagement that's happening on the site and send it over to our advertisers to hopefully pay a pretty penny for kind of these more advanced audiences that we're able to deliver. And in this is just an example. Within Google Analytics, you can connect that DFP account. I think the DFP language has since updated since they rebranded to Google Ad Manager, but same idea. Once you have that audience created, you essentially link it to your DFP account, send it over, and then that will show up in Google Ad Manager for you to allow advertisers to advertise to. So in summary, we talked about a few things that publishers are running into and some ways to actually mitigate those issues. So the first one we talked about, no data consistency across properties and brands. That's really creating that global architecture to make sure that you kind of have that apples to apples comparison across all of your different brands, your properties, your countries. The second part was no ability to do enterprise level reporting across properties and brands. So this one built off the first, so having that analytics architecture, that global architecture, but then also layering on top of that Google Analytics 360 roll-up properties to get that information. Analytics tools are expensive for high traffic organizations. We talked through some ways that you can mitigate your pricing concerns. So one is creating that measurement plan and tracking plan to make sure that you're tracking only what's needed and what's required. But then also the second piece of that was making sure that you're working with your dev team to use tracking methods that are going to give you the data you need, but also ensure that you aren't paying a premium for all of the different types of hits you're sending, just the sheer number of those. The second to last, no insight into content's role in generating advertising revenue. This was the piece where you're integrating Google Analytics 360 with Google Ad Manager and pulling Ad Manager advertising data into Google Analytics to actually build out reports and better understand Google Analytics content information layered on top of that advertising data. And then the last piece was the inability to deliver targeted audiences to advertisers. And this piece was the other side of the integration with Ad Manager, sending Google Analytics audiences with behavior data over to Google Ad Manager to actually target to those specific granular audiences. So hopefully this was good. Hopefully this gave you kind of a breakdown of some of the main pain points we're seeing publishers run into and some of the ways that we help them solve them. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out. My email is in this deck. It's agibson@infotrust.com. But there's a link in this deck. Once you get it sent out, you can actually click that as well. So be happy to walk you through these in more detail and give you some more information on how we'd solve those issues. But hopefully this was beneficial for everyone. If you have any questions, definitely let me know. Send some questions to the chat panel here, or you can email me directly. So thanks everyone for joining. I'll take a look at the questions here real quick. Let's see. We did have one question. Do you have any recommendations for publishers in terms of what web analytics tool they should be using? Yeah, this is a good question. So I'll be a little biased. We are Google Analytics 360 resellers. So generally, most of the clients we work with in publishing, they use Google Analytics 360, and I think it works really, really well for them. We have heard good things about Chartbeat and Parsley. Those are two other kind of more publisher-specific analytics tools. But in terms of the sheer flexibility and ease of use, I think Google Analytics 360 is by far better than some of the other options out there. So good question, and I'm happy to go through that in more detail if you want to reach out personally. I think that's it. That's the only question that we got. So any other questions come up, feel free to email me, but thanks for your time today. Hopefully this was helpful. Definitely shoot me an email if you have any additional questions. All right, thanks everyone.